Hi, Juan.
Hi, do you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, I'm hearing you okay. The first question, what is good musical composition for you?
Well, that's quite a difficult question you made. Good musical composition. I think in arts, good and bad are really relative. Don't you think? I think it depends a lot on context. I mean, where are you? When are you? Of course, it changes in times. In time, if you are in Vienna in the 18th century, you have some sort of like basic rules for composing or somehow, and it's not different now. I mean, if you are in Colombia, uh, good composing might be a little bit different from being in Central Europe. I don't know, like in Germany, you know,
Yes.
and that makes the question really difficult because I've been in different places. I've shared different interests with a lot of people, and I have been thinking a lot lately about that. What means to compose good music, now that I'm teaching composition in the university since a couple of years back, I make this question all the time because I find myself giving advices to students that are based in my taste, in my personal taste, and I wonder if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, everything is connected by subjectivities. You cannot be totally objective, and since there is no one simple answer to what is good music, you cannot just rely to that. You have to think very well what is that you like, but also what is like that others like, and what is that is like some sort of middle point between those tastes. Here, for example, in Colombia, there's a lot of people working with traditional music, for example, and there's a lot, of course, of students of composition that are also interested in traditional music. So they're trying to mix everything up, like
Yes.
to take some ideas from traditional music and mix them with contemporary music, and that's quite interesting. I mean, personally, I'm not really that connected to traditional Colombian music. I am more of a globalized subject.
Yes.
And when I was young, I was hearing all the time rock, for example, rock music from Latin America and from the United States, most of it, and from the United Kingdom. But that disconnected me somehow a little bit from this traditional Colombian music. But I do enjoy it, and the university where I studied, they had a really strong program in traditional music. So I learned a lot of things from that. I know what is supposed to be correct, if you want to use that term, or to be good in those terms for traditional music. So I find it interesting. I
Yes.
struggle sometimes because I don't connect aesthetically or about taste with the students and the ideas they are developing. But I try to somehow separate myself from that sphere and try to give some advice from a more objective perspective, But there is something about taste that is connecting everything. And I wonder a lot about what is taste, and how this affects the way we listen to music and we think about music. So I don't know if I have given an answer yet, but I've given some
Yes.
I have
But
given some perspectives about
yeah,
around that.
but what is for you, right? Would it be change if I would a little bit correct answer? What is good musical composition for you?
For me, I think there is something um, about exploration that interests me a lot. Experimentation, when the pieces are risky, when they reach for somewhere new, when they are trying to take you out from your comfort zone, those are the good pieces for me. Those that makes you ask some questions, nor just the pieces that are like making you feel comfortable somehow, like please you in the ear, but the pieces that questions you, that raises a question and makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable. I think that's the most interesting kind of music, and the music that perhaps I find, I don't know if good or bad, but interesting.
Can you say the last piece, which was that? Which was interesting.
Which piece? Which one?
Yes, the last one.
The last one
which you heard or see or experience.
Okay. The last piece that I experienced that was really, well, now that we're talking about Ana Maria Romano that you interviewed, I conduct an ensemble in the university where I'm working. It's like the Contemporary Music Ensemble, and it's really directed to experimental music. So there is a piece from Ana Maria Romano that is called ¿Qué pasaría si? What if you may translate it like that. What would happen if, or something like that. And it's a piece that she composed in the commemoration of Paulina Oliveros' decease. 1 year after her decease, this Deep Listening Institute decided to commission some pieces for different composers, and Ana Maria Romano was invited to write a piece there. And this piece was really interesting because it was really open. It was just like a series of instructions that you had to follow somehow. And it was really personal somehow. So we decided to work it with ensemble. And at the beginning, it was quite difficult because there was a lot of students that hadn't had an experience with this kind of repertoire. They're very open, very indeterminate somehow. And but at the end, everyone connected so well, and we ended up doing something that involved a lot of different aspects of exploration. You know, there was some choreographies, some movements in the stage. There was like an exploration of scent. There was like an exploration of clothing and how it sounded. So it ended up being really fantastic. I think that was the last piece that blown somehow my mind. It blown my mind, and I was really glad to be a part of this. I think I connect a lot with the pieces, even when I'm playing them or when I'm composing them. That makes some sort of deep connection, or where I'm analyzing them as well. Just the pieces that I hear, okay, sometimes I connect a little bit with them, but it's for me always better to experience the music somehow, creating it.
Yeah. Yes, got it. And how would you describe your own music?
My own music. Oh, well, it has a lot of different dimensions, I think. I remember quite well in 2009, so a couple of years ago, like 12 or 13 years ago, I had a lesson with one interesting composer from Latin America. It's called Coriona Haronian. I had a lesson with him, and I remember that I showed him a piece for voice and electronics that I was just composing by the time. That it was supposed. I mean, it converted like my, the piece where which I presented for my for getting my diploma, my bachelor's diploma. And I remember that I explained everything to him, and it was really well constructed. I was working them with proportions, with Aryan proportions, the gold section, and a lot of things. And at the end of the lesson, he was telling me like, how old are you? And I said, I don't remember. I was like 20 something. And he said to me something like, you are already quite sure of what you want to do. And I took it like a compliment somehow. But then he said to me, but you're too young to be so sure about what you want to do. So that aspect of that question really marked me somehow, really had an impact on me. And from that point, I think I've been exploring a lot, like working a lot with different things. So my music in some aspect, it's very varied. It has a lot of the dimensions. I usually like to work a lot with electronics in different ways. Lately, since I'm working in the university, when you work in the university, you have to think in research somehow, because you are supposed to be like doing research. So I decided to join a project with a professor there. That was the project was somehow a place to ask some questions about what musical timbre is, how should it be taught in the university, especially in this all these subjects that are related to ear development, where you train your ear somehow, and that sometimes are connected with solfege and things like that. So it's like for that kind of class, and we were thinking about musical timbre, and this person who I worked worked a lot with embodied cognition. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. That is something that is related to cognitive science of second generation. And we explore a lot of the question about how the body is related to the cognition. No? How do you understand music through your own body? And that, made a connection with me somehow. I started like relating topics that were completely disconnected for me, like timbre and gesture, for example. And somehow through this research, I managed to connect them. And since then, I'm exploring a lot that relation between body,
Yes.
Mind somehow, and musical gestures and things
Yes.
like that. So my pieces are like thinking a lot about that lately.
Got it. But you have used some gaming principles as well, right? In some pieces.
Yeah. Actually, based on that research, a piece for a device that is called Kinect, Arise. It is a piece commissioned by a Mexican percussionist that is called Eusebio Sanchez. He was back then working with Ibermúsicas, that is like an institution very important for us here in Latin America. This scholarship that he obtained was for like thinking in the pandemic, and especially on how to connect music to young people. So he decided to send a project about gamification, or working with different sorts of game devices in order to relate them to the music. And he decided to commission me a piece, and I started to work with Kinect because I had some experience back in Germany when I was there. So I had a couple of experiments with Kinect. So I decided to compose a piece for Kinect. And but it's totally connected to this thing that I was telling you about, all the relation between gesture, human gesture, body gesture, and sound somehow. So the media, the tool used like to connect all those dimensions is the Kinect, the device, the gaming device.
And what is the way of composing, right? What are the typical stages you as composer go through?
Typical stages like desperation and sadness, and no, I'm joking. Well, it depends on the piece. There are some pieces that are really fast to compose. I'm currently as well trying to get in touch a little bit with my roots for saying something. When I was studying here in Colombia, I used to do a lot of indeterminate repertoire and improvisation. So currently I'm working a lot of pieces that involve somehow improvisation. So that's one thing. And those kind of pieces, for example, they are very different to compose from a piece that is more somehow organized or structured, like thought in a more traditional terms of composing. But there is also these pieces that I'm working that are with devices, for example. Those are very different because usually I start them with a little bit of programming, you know, like programming the device and exploring
Yes.
with improvisation and trying to take some sounds that I would use in the piece, and then I compose a piece. So it depends. It depends a lot of the piece, but yeah, I usually go for the most practical thing first, like trying to understand what I want to hear, and
Yes.
then try to relate that to the musical ideas that I have somehow.
So it's some kind of experimentation stage. Okay, and then there is a building stage. And before is some
Yeah.
kind of conceptual stage as well. So you think or write ideas down or how it.
Yeah, but that comes after experimenting somehow.
Okay, you just intuitively experiment and then you understand, then you grasp some information, then you build
And
some concept and then you implementing it.
exactly, then I understand what I want to do. I
Yes.
understand what I want to do. But there are some pieces that are more structured somehow, and they're more like based in concepts. So, for example, I have a violin piece that is a little bit old, like 2014 or something like that. And in that piece, for example, I had an idea that was on a spiral. It is a concept. And a spiral and a reflection, because I was reading Borges back then. And I remember I was really interested about mirrors and the concept of mirror that Borges develops in his stories. And I decided to make a piece based on those concepts. I didn't know what it was going to sound or anything like that. And I started with that. But it has been a while since I composed in that way. I prefer like first to experiment myself, try some
Yes.
sounds, or invite the players and work with them with improvisation.
Got it. Got it.
Mm.
And what kind of technologies, it could be hardware or software, you are using like more frequently in your pieces?
Okay. Well, right now I'm working, as I told you, a lot with improvisation. So, for example, I have a duet
Yes.
that is like do-it-yourself thing
Yes.
with electronics a lot. It is one with one composer from here from Colombia. It's called Sergio Cote, and we work a lot with no input mixing. I don't know if you have heard of it. No input mixing is just taking some sort of mixing device and generate some sort of feedback, electronic feedback, connecting some ins and outs, and then you get some sort of sound produced by feedback, electronic feedback. And we work a lot with that. We have our own mixing devices, and we work a lot with that. But as well, we are constructing instruments all the time, exploring with devices, with sensors. I like to work a lot with accelerometers, with these XYZ devices, sensors that work with movement. And I also do a lot of experimentation with Kinect there. So those are like my main tools right now. But I'm as well working some other pieces with other ensembles that include the construction of, for example, loudspeakers and different sorts of using those loudspeakers in non-traditional ways. For example, right now we're working on a piece from a Bolivian composer that is called Jorge Monroy.
Mm-hmm.
He has this device. He designed this device that is like loudspeakers connected with cords, and you have to move them around. You have to, in the scene, you have to like move them around, and it is really interesting because of the Doppler effect and everything that it's sounding in the loudspeakers. So I'm really right now working with do-it-yourself kind of stuff. I'm really interested in that. But I also work a lot with software as well. I prefer to program everything with pure data.
Mm-hmm.
That is like the software where I feel more comfortable with. But I have worked as well with some other stuff like Max that is really similar, And with this Kinect thing, I've been exploring a lot some software that is called Processing,
Yes.
and Touch Designer, and that had opened a lot of doors about image as well, and processing image in real time. So a couple of concerts that I've made recently has to do with image and sound and how they connect. For example, I just made an installation with the group I was telling about with Sergio Cote. We invited a couple of VJs, these guys that are working a lot with images, and we made like some sort of installation in a place that wasn't like it is like a traditional bar from Bogotá, and they opened the doors and they decided to create some sort of scholarship with an institution here that is called Experimental Teatro, and there we worked a lot like with images, with projections, with stages, with installations, and there, for example, I worked with feedback a lot. I had this drum, this snare drum, and some contact microphone and amplifier device, and I decided like to create some feedback around the drum. It was really amazing. I have to compose a piece with these ideas because they're really interesting. So that's the main things I'm using right now.
And looking back, right, how have your music changed in the last 20 years? Or 10 years, let's say, in 10 years. How your music changed in the last 10 years?
I think it has changed a lot. When I was younger, I was really concerned about form, for example, how things developed in time. I was very concerned about musical materials, very defined musical materials. I was structuring everything. I remember I was quite a fan of structuring pitches and stuff like that. Right now, I'm starting to feel a little bit less and less interested in those types of structures. I'm trying to find a way to structure my pieces, but that is a little bit more organic or not imposed by the outside somehow. So I'm really currently exploring more like the sound itself of the pieces I'm working on, and try to understand, for example, the time that those sounds should last in a structure because of their own nature somehow, and how their own logic, their own like inner structure suggests me a way to interconnect them somehow. So I think that's the bigger change. If you hear my pieces, my last pieces, they're a little bit more, a little bit less structure in a I don't know, like in a how do you put it, like in an external way somehow.
Yes.
Like imposing some structures to the music, but things that are more like organic somehow, and really interesting how things develop organically. That I would say is the most important change in my music in the last 10 years.
Yes. And what is your fears as composer?
My fears.
What you fear as composer most frequently?
I have to deal a lot with anxiety when I'm starting a new project. I think that's the thing that I fear the most, like the beginning of the projects, because the uncertainty of knowing what is going to be the piece, that makes me a little bit anxious. And sometimes I find I struggle with starting new projects. But when I'm connected, when I'm in the zone, everything flows somehow. Yeah, I think that's the most fear thing, like the empty paper syndrome or something, like facing to the blank page and not knowing what is going to be the piece, because when you already know how it's going to sound somehow, or what it's going to be about, you have some certainties, and you can just follow them like this. I'm going to go this way and I'm going to do that and that. But when you don't know, when you're just exploring and trying to find what is interesting to you, that's the hardest part, I think.
Yes, and why you still compose?
I find myself asking the same question on and on. Because right now I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm teaching, as I told you, I'm conducting, I'm improvising a lot. And sometimes I ask myself, do I want to still compose? I mean, it's still important for me to compose. Do I need to compose? Or I'm just creatively satisfied by all the other things that I'm doing around. And there is a need somehow. There is something that pulls me, that drags me to compose again. Not only the people that ask me to do some projects with them, the commissions I get and stuff, but the something like a creativity, some sort of impulse that I find inside that drag me to write. I don't have a lot of time to compose as earlier. That's a thing as well. But I find myself sometimes like craving composition, like wanting to do it somehow, and that hasn't stopped. I think when that stops, I will leave that. But yeah, and now there is another factor that pulls me to compose a lot. That is teaching composition, because it's really interesting. You hear all these ideas from students, and then you start to work yourself.
Mhm.
Your brain starts to work, and then you have a lot of ideas that you say, that's a really cool idea for a piece. So right now I'm like very dragged by those impulses, by those ideas of students and stuff. So that's really interesting, that kind of dialogue that you create with your students that makes you more creative somehow.
Got it. And now some questions about the music landscape, and particularly Colombia. How music landscape changed in Colombia in this century? So it means in like last 20, more than 20 years.
Really interesting. There is a lot of music in Latin America, a lot of traditional music, for example, and that's in the soundscape all the time, in the landscape. That has been there. That's what most people hear. I mean, if you walk around a little bit,
Yes.
you will hear a lot of music, and the music that is being played the most is that kind of, not only the traditional popular music, but as well pop music, like reggaeton and all those sort of things. I think that's the thing that sounds the most in my surroundings somehow. But Bogota is quite different. Bogota has a lot of different scenes, and has a lot of music as well. There is a very important rock scene that has been consolidated since the late 80s, I think.
Yes.
I mean, there is rock music since the 60s or something like that, 50s, 60s, but it got consolidated somehow in the 80s, and that's really around. That's everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of bars, there is a lot of concerts, there is a lot of bands, there is a lot of projects with rock and with hip hop as well. That happened a little bit later, like in the 90s. That is sounding all the time around as well. And then you have this experimental music scene that is really exciting. Yeah, that has begun as well, like in the 80s, 90s. I mean, there was a couple of experiments in the 60s, some composers, 60s, 70s, that were working with electronics and with a lot of things. But in the 90s, it got really strong somehow, and there is a lot of places right now that are working a lot with that kind of things, with that kind of
But
sounds somehow.
if I would narrow down to the question, how contemporary music or new music, or contemporary art music landscape change?
Well, back then in the 80s, I mean, back then in the in the like the second half of the 20th century, you had a lot of composers that were studying in the conservatory, and they were composing for orchestra. and there were composing sometimes for camera groups, and that was like the scene of contemporary music in Bogota. That was some concerts around. Then in the 80s, as I told you, with the arrival or with the beginning of electronic music and experimentation scene, it has widened up a lot. There is a lot of projects mixing jazz, contemporary music, electronics, experimentation. So it has changed a lot. There is a lot of different scenes. For example, right now here we have a really strong scene of like sound artists that are tired of working just in installations in museums, and they decided to do concerts and stuff like that. So they're improvising a lot, and they're bringing a lot of ideas to the scene somehow. So right now you still have the more traditional scene. There is a lot of concerts of orchestras and bands here. The band movement is huge, and there are some contemporary composers working with bands as well, and camera music and stuff like that, like chamber music. And then you have as well this experimental scene somehow that is like taking a lot of spaces, opening new spaces all the time. So I think that's how it has changed in the last years.
Yes, and how audience of contemporary music changed?
How, could you repeat that, please?
Is how audience of contemporary music changed?
That's a really good question.
Does it have its own audience, or it's mostly like musicians only, or how it works?
Of course, the prime source of audience is musicians for contemporary music, but there has been some spaces that started developing their own scene. Like, for example, if you go to Matik, that is a traditional bar here, is already traditional for experimental music. You're gonna find them some people around that are interested in that, and they are not be musicians, but they know that there's a lot of contemporary music happening there, so they decide to go there. So yes, I think those audiences have been developing around the spaces, like the stages that are presenting contemporary music. So every stage has its own scene somehow. That is not enormous, it's not big, but it has a couple of people that is interested in those kind of things. And we have been trying to connect the zines so the people can start to relate to other types of music, because I mean, if you're usually going all the time to Matik, you're going to find a lot of things, but they have like a line, like an aesthetic line that are exploring. Yes. And we're trying like to mix them together, like to call somehow the public from one space to the other and all the way around with a lot of projects. So yeah, it has changed like that, I think.
Got it. And how you see where is this contemporary music scene is going in Colombia? What are the future trends?
Well, I mean, I hope to have a more diverse scene, I have been working for that in the university where I teach. I try to make some concerts of experimental music, and I try that most of the students go, and not only students, music students, but I don't know. I work in a place where we have like the arts faculty, and we have contemporary dance, we have traditional dance, we have theater, we have arts of all types, and then I'm trying to do some projects to connect with those scenes somehow. So, for example, last time with the ensemble that I conduct, we participated in a research project with the dance. With the dance, I mean the dance faculty for saying something. They had this project of performance, and they were working a lot with the body and exploring spaces with the body, and we decided to join them and to work a little bit of sound around the body exploring part. So I try to make the scene a little bit more diverse somehow, not just musicians hearing musicians, but a lot of different people connected somehow by something in this contemporary scene, not only music, but arts in general.
Got it. And the last question. What is the contemporary role of contemporary music in Colombia society?
The role, the
Role,
I didn't.
role. What?
How it has grown?
No, role. What role?
Role. Yeah, okay. What role it's contemporary music playing in society?
Yes.
Well, that's hard to say, because I think we have a little impact somehow. I mean, I'm talking about a country of 50 million people and a city of 10 million. And the impact, if you compare it with other genres and activities, it's really little, but I all the time think about that, and I think the most important part of the contemporary scene for me is to try to create a more critical auditory somehow, some critical public, somehow that people begin to question themselves about why is I don't know, reggaeton the most popular thing, or why is rock music so powerful for the young people. I like people to think around those ideas. And I think that contemporary music in general is really useful for critical thinking, for develop some sort of criticism, but not in a bad way, but in a good way that somehow, I don't know, feed all the music scene, all the arts scene, and that you don't. We have a say here in Colombia that is to eat something completely without chewing, you don't have to do that. You have to chew, you have to enjoy, you have to think about what you're hearing, why you're hearing what you're hearing. That, I think, is the most useful thing of contemporary music or contemporary arts in general for the public and for the general audience. And that's how I see it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you for the interview.